Thank you so much. Well, good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you to Sakai for inviting me. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome to my colleague, Dr. Polia, from the department. I come to you with a different lens. I'm here in my capacity as special advisor to the minister, and I'm focused on policy, regulation, and technology. But I also come to you and to this conversation as an education and technology lawyer with postgraduate experience in IT law, but also in private practice, grappling with the issues that AI and technology present, particularly in the education space. So let me start today with a simple question. What is the purpose of education? Is it to get the right answer? Or is it to learn how to think? This is a question that keeps coming up in the presentations that came before me today. Because for the first time in history, we are putting tools in the hands of learners that can answer almost anything instantly. And that then changes the question. AI changes the question. The question is no longer, can learners access knowledge? Of course they can. The question is, will they still learn how to think? And that really is what today is about and what this talk is going to focus on. Not AI for its own sake, not hype, not fear, but what we choose to protect in education, what we choose to improve, and what we must be very careful not to lose. So now, before we get into the principles and the practical playbooks, let's be honest about where we are with AI already. And some of this has already been touched on earlier today. It's already in lesson planning. It's already in homework, in assessment, and in administration. Teachers are using it, learners are using it, and systems are beginning to use it. So the question is not whether AI will enter education or if it will enter it. It's already here. The real question is whether we'll use it intentionally. And that matters because if we look at what the OECD has said, AI can improve learning. It can improve teaching, it can improve the efficiency of our systems, but only where it's used deliberately, within sound pedagogy, and with clear safeguards. It can strengthen teaching and system productivity, but over-reliance can also reduce active engagement and weaken deep learning. And some of that's been touched on by some of the previous speakers today. So today, I do not want to give you a lecture about the future. I would like to give you a playbook, something practical, and something that you can start using from tomorrow morning. But before I do that, I'd like to ground this in what we are doing as a country, because this is not theoretical for us. And for me personally, it's not theoretical. My work has sat across education, technology, regulation, and legal risk, which is precisely why I believe that AI in education requires us to be both imaginative, but also disciplined. So as the special advisor to the minister, I think it's important to clearly set out where we are as a country, because we as a country are not standing still on this issue. And the minister has made her position very clear. We will not drift into AI in education. We'll lead it. And we'll do so deliberately, responsibly, and coherently. And that position is already starting to show through in the work that we're doing in the department. So let me highlight three key things here. Firstly, there is now a brand new ministerial steering committee on AI and education, bringing together government, academia, civil society, and partners to provide strategic direction and coordination. And you might ask, well, why does that matter? Is it just another steering committee? Because this is why it matters. Without coordination, what sounds like innovation can very quickly become fragmentation. One pilot here, another pilot there, different tools, different partners, different standards, and absolutely no coherence. And when that happens, the schools that are already better resourced, they move ahead faster. And the schools that are already in vulnerable positions fall further behind. So the first thing we are doing is establishing a coherent national direction. One system, one conversation, one strategic center of gravity. And this ties in very neatly with what our fellow departments in communications and digital technologies has done by publishing the National AI Strategy. Secondly, we are reviewing the white paper on e-education. And frankly, this is overdue. It was written in 2004, and that is before smartphones became central to our everyday life. That was before cloud computing changed the way we deliver content. And it obviously was before generative AI like ChatGPT. So it's forced us to rethink teaching, learning, assessment, and the meaning of authorship even. Policy has to catch up with reality. And it's very tricky when technology, as we all know, goes faster than our ability to regulate and to make policies. But we've got to try. And policy has now got to do two things at the same time. Firstly, it has to enable innovation. We need to unlock that opportunity. And at the same time, we need to protect learners and the learning process itself. And then thirdly, while this longer-term policy work is underway, we are also developing interim guidance for schools. Working with UNICEF and others, we'll develop this guidance because teachers, they do not need abstract reassurance. They need practical clarity. They need clarity on what is appropriate, what is not, where are the opportunities, where are the red flags, and what kind of safeguards should sit around the use of AI in schools. And that is exactly the kind of practical guidance we are working to provide at the moment. So if I had to summarize the ministers and the department's approach in one line, it would be this. We are not anti-AI. We are anti-unintentional AI. Because AI absolutely does bring opportunity. It can support personalized learning. It can assist with administrative efficiency. It can generate useful insights. We've seen that today. It can help bridge gaps for access, but it also carries real risks. It can carry risks around data privacy, the bias factor, academic integrity, and the risk of deepening inequality if it's poorly governed. So the task of leadership is not to choose between being really excited and optimistic and then being cautious. It's about clarifying and managing both at the same time. And I say that not only from where I sit in government, but also from having worked on technology matters in legal practice, where you learn very quickly that innovation moves fastest when trust, clarity, and good governance move with it. Through that, we can harness opportunity, mitigate risk, and lead the system. Now, with that national context in place, let me move to the practical heart of what I'd like to share with you today. Everything that I'm going to say from here on comes down to one simple idea. Not all AI use is equal. And we must not make the mistake of thinking that that is the case. Because when people talk about AI in education, they often talk about it as though it was one thing. It's really not. Some uses of AI enhance learning. Some uses of AI replace learning. And some uses are relatively low risk and high value. Others are high risk and require very careful boundaries. So if we do not distinguish between different kinds of AI use, we will either overreact and miss real opportunities, or we will underreact and create real harm. And this is why the first move in the playbook is not to ask, is AI good or is AI bad? The first move is to ask, what kind of AI use are we talking about? And that brings me now to the most useful distinction that I know. There are broadly two categories of AI use in education at the moment. The first is learner-facing. We've heard about some of those today. This includes homework tools, tutors, personalized learning systems, and proctoring tools, which I'll go into in a bit more. These can be incredibly powerful, but they are also where the highest risks sit. The second category is educator and system-facing AI. This includes lesson planning, administration, translation, moderation support, and certain kinds of analytics. This is where some of the quickest wins are, because these uses can save us time, improve efficiency, and support better judgment, often with lower developmental risk to learners. I'm not too sure if any of you have followed the neuroscience, but if, for example, looking at the neuroscience on this, if you deploy AI systems that are learner-facing to learners in, let's say, the foundation phase, you have a very high risk of offloading their cognitive development onto the AI system at huge risk to the learner. And so age appropriateness is going to be a huge factor in the way that we approach it, and the way schools approach it, the way government approaches it. So the first practical rule is very simple. Start with teacher-facing AI before scaling learner-facing AI. It's my recommendation. If you are a school, a system, or an institution trying to work out where to begin where the value is clear and the risk is lower. That gives you space to build capability, confidence, governance, and trust before you move into the more complex terrain of learner-facing tools. Now, once we have that distinction in place, the next question becomes, what does this look like in practice? So let's go to the classroom. Let's begin with homework, because this is where many people first encounter the problem, whether you're a teacher or a parent or a learner. If I was to give a learner a task that says, explain photosynthesis, AI can do that in seconds. And if that is the task, then as we've heard this morning, the problem is not the learner. The problem is the task. And that is why one of the most important responses to AI is not surveillance. It's about better design. So instead of asking, explain photosynthesis, rather say, explain it, but give a real example from your own environment. Identify one mistake that AI might make in explaining it, and reflect on what confused you about the topic. Now that changes something. The moment we do that, and this goes back to the earlier discussion around finding your voice and inserting your voice into your work, now the learner has to think. Now the learner has to apply. Now the learner has to evaluate. And now the task cannot be completed without proper engagement. So here is the principle that underlies Rule 2. Design tasks that AI cannot complete without thinking. That is a curriculum design issue. It's a pedagogy issue. It's an assessment design issue. It's not just an AI issue. It's a fundamental teaching and learning issue. And frankly, it's one which should always have been central to what we do. And once we see that, then we stop asking, should we ban the tool? And we start talking about how do we build better learning? And that leads to the next point. If the first response is to redesign tasks, then the second is to teach learners how to use AI well. And that's come up very strongly in the previous presentations. Because one of the dangers in the moment, in this very moment, is that learners are using AI as an answer machine. But that is not the only way to use it. And we've seen that this morning. We can teach learners to prompt AI differently. We can teach them to say, don't give me the answers, ask me questions, or challenge my reasoning, or explain this in 3 different ways, or what is weak in my argument. That matters because the posture then changes. The learner is no longer outsourcing the whole task. The learner is using AI to stimulate thinking. And so the next practical rule is AI should provoke thinking, not replace it. And that is true in writing, in creative writing. It's true in research. It's true in explanation, in revision, in homework support. And it's one of the most important mindsets that we can build right now. Now, if that is what good learner use looks like, what about teacher use? And that brings us to lesson planning. This is one of the clearest and most immediate opportunities available to us using AI. Teachers are under enormous pressure across the country. Time is scarce, the administrative load is high. And I know that my fellow co-speaker, Tsepo, is going to be dealing with that and what AI can do shortly. So when teachers use AI to draft lesson structures, generate examples, suggest activities, or simplify texts, or create variations of presenting different content, that can be hugely valuable. It can save a lot of time. It can bring fun back to learning and teaching. And the OECD research points to this clearly. AI can improve teacher productivity and support teacher quality when it's used appropriately. But here is the key, and this keeps coming through time and again through every talk. AI is not the teacher. The teacher still decides what is appropriate, what is accurate, does it fit the curriculum, what suits the class, and what needs to be changed in what has been generated by the AI. So the practical operating principle here, and the next rule that I've come up with, is that AI drafts, teachers decide. That one sentence is enough to resolve a lot of anxiety because it keeps the human professional at the center. It uses the machine for speed, not for judgment. And that same principle travels well into another major opportunity area that we have in South Africa, and that's language and inclusion. In our context, one of the most exciting uses of AI is for access. AI can help with translation, and we're seeing data sets getting stronger and stronger in multiple languages. AI can simplify complex text. It can generate vocabulary support. It can assist in multilingual environments. And in a country like ours, where language remains a real barrier for many learners, that is not a trivial benefit. That is potentially transformative. And so if you're looking for low risk, high value uses of AI, this is near the top of that list. Because here, AI is not replacing thinking. It is opening the door to understanding, which gives us the next rule. Use AI first where it expands access, not where it replaces thinking. And that is a very useful filter for schools and systems. It helps separate the exciting from the merely fashionable. Now, let me move from the classroom and classroom learning to one of the most sensitive spaces in this conversation, and that is assessment. And that's where I'll reflect on the topic of proctoring. And for those of you who haven't heard about proctoring, it's the use of technology to monitor learners during an assessment environment, especially during remote or online assessments. It is often where AI in education becomes incredibly uncomfortable, and understandably so, with facial recognition software that has biased data in it against people of certain races, for example. Those are the types of challenges that come up in this space. And understandably so, we need to develop our data sets further. We need them to remove that bias. Because here, when you're using proctoring software, AI is watching, it's flagging, it's interpreting, and in some cases, it's influencing judgment about learner conduct. And this is high stakes. And this is exactly where we must resist the temptation to hand over too much to the machine. AI can detect patterns, it can flag anomalies, it can identify things that may need attention, but it cannot understand context in the way we as humans do. It does not know whether learners, for example, in an exam environment, looked away from the screen because they were cheating, because they were anxious, because there was a noise in the room that disturbed them, or because they were processing information in a different way to the way the system said you should be processing it. So the principle here that comes up next is AI can flag suspicious behavior, but humans must remain the judge. Humans must make disciplinary or integrity judgments, not the AI. AI can help us with flagging, absolutely. So this means no automatic final conclusions in an assessment environment. No disciplinary outcomes generated by AI alone, and always a human review process with an appeal pathway. This is not about anti-technology. This is about pro-fairness, something which is at the heart of the educative process. And the same logic applies in marking and moderation. AI can help build and generate rubrics. It can suggest feedback. It can support consistency checks. It can help with large volumes of work. Those are all real benefits. But again, the issue is not whether AI can contribute. The issue is what role should it play? And if it supports consistency and reduces repetition and reduces the administrative burden, then fantastic, that's great. But if it starts replacing your professional judgment, then we have a problem. And so that brings in the next rule. Use AI to support consistency, not to replace judgment. That is how you protect both professionalism and quality. Now, once you start talking about assessment, another issue comes up immediately. What counts as cheating now? And the answer is this. If we as a system, if schools do not define it clearly, confusion will fill that space. Many learners are not trying to cheat in a malicious sense. Many are just operating in a gray zone. They are genuinely they do not know what is allowed. They do not know what must be disclosed, and they do not know what crosses the line. And so one of the simplest and most powerful things that we can do is create clarity. We should be defining at least 3 topics or 3 categories here. What AI is allowed in the space, what AI is supported, but must be disclosed, and what AI is prohibited in specified tasks. Immediately, that gives teachers clarity. It gives learners clarity. It gives schools consistency, and it reduces the guesswork that so often becomes misconduct. And so the rule here is clarity reduces misconduct, as it always has in schools. If expectations are vague, behavior becomes messy. If expectations are clearer, accountability becomes possible. Now, let me shift from assessment integrity to another area that often gets far too little attention in practice, and that is data. Perhaps this is the lawyer in me speaking, having to deal with so many questions around data protection and POPI, but some of the most serious risks in AI are not the flashy ones. They are the quiet ones, the unclear data practices, the opaque systems, and decisions being influenced by tools that no one can really fully explain how they work. So one of the easiest mistakes schools can make in adopting a tool is adopting it without doing a proper due diligence. Because a tool might look really helpful, but if you don't know what's happening with the data, the red light should be flashing immediately. Where does the data go? Who owns it? Who can access it? How long are you storing it for? Can it be reused? And can it be linked to other information? If you do not know the answers to these questions, you are not ready to use that tool. And this is not fear, it's just basic governance. And so if you've got no clarity, then don't use it yet. Rather go and get that clarity. And that means do not upload personal learner data casually. Do not, rather prefer anonymized data or small amounts of data, only what is absolutely possible and necessary in the circumstances. And make sure that platforms that are used in schools are actually understood before you download them. Because data protection connects directly now to another concern, and that is automated decision-making. This is where AI moves from being a support tool to becoming a decision maker in your environment. And this is where even brighter red lights should be flashing. AI should not decide who progresses, who is labeled at risk, who is disciplined, who is excluded from opportunity. And none of this should be happening without meaningful human oversight. So AI can provide that insight. It can identify the patterns. It can support attention, but it must not be the final arbiter of a learner's pathway. And that brings us to the next rule. AI can support decisions, but it must not make high-stakes decisions alone. That means AI may help identify the patterns that you need, the risks, the areas requiring attention, but it should not on its own determine who progresses, who's at risk, who's disciplined, and who's excluded from opportunity. Those are human decisions, and they must remain human decisions. That is the line that protects dignity, fairness, and accountability. And now, once we lift our eyes from the individual tool to the school or a system, one set of practical lessons becomes important. Let's all avoid projectitis, which is what I call it. And we've seen this in education before. A new technology appears, a pilot begins, everyone's super excited, a few schools get selected, there are reports, launches, photos, and then quietly, very little changes. And why? Because the system was never really the target. So one of the disciplines we need in the AI era is restraint. Not every shiny tool deserves a pilot. And not every pilot deserves to be scaled. And not every innovation deserves our attention. Often the better strategy is to choose fewer tools and use them more deeply. So that brings the next rule: fewer tools, deeper use. And that is how you build capability. This is how you learn what actually works. This is how you avoid fragmentation. And once we say that, the next truth becomes even more obvious. And that is what keeps coming through in all the presentations today. No AI strategy in education can succeed without teachers. Absolutely none. The updated European guidance on this puts it well. It says teachers need the confidence and capability to assess AI critically, including questions of fairness, transparency, privacy, safety, and well-being. And that is exactly right. Teachers are not just users in this story. They are the ethical guardians of the classroom. They are the ones who notice when a tool is helping, and they're also the ones who notice when it's confusing. They're the ones who notice when a learner is leaning too heavily on it. And so if we want responsible AI in education, we do not start with devices. We start with teacher capability. And that leads to the next rule. AI succeeds only if teachers lead it. And if you're wondering where to start while that capability grows, the answer is to begin where the gains are visible and the risks are lower. So start where gains are obvious. Start with administration. Start with lesson planning. Start with translation. Start with low-risk efficiency gains. Here, the recent Brookings research is especially helpful because it gives a very practical frame to this. And it says, if we want AI to serve children well, we need to think of it in terms of how to help education systems prosper, prepare, and protect, not just simply adopt. And this requires our use of AI to be anchored in sound pedagogy, practical guardrails, and a clear duty of care towards children. And that gives the final rule in the sequence. Start where value is immediate and risk is low. It's a sensible way to start building confidence without creating unnecessary harm. Now, let me bring this all together for you in one simple tool. If you remember only one thing from my presentation today, I'd like you to try to remember this checklist. Before you're using any AI tool, ask yourself these 5 questions. What problem are we solving? Who is using it? What data is involved? What decisions are being made with the tool? And who is accountable? That is your pre-flight checklist. If you cannot answer those 5 questions clearly, then you're not ready to use the tool. And that single discipline will prevent a lot of bad decisions, but it will certainly improve a lot of good ones too. And so as we zoom out here, I close, I've spent a lot of time today talking to you about guardrails, safeguards, but let me be equally clear about the opportunity. If we get this right, AI can do things that matter deeply to us. Teachers can get time back. It can support learners more responsively. It can improve access. It can help systems work better. And those are all real. Those are all things that matter to us deeply as a country. But if we get it wrong, thinking declines. Trust in technology erodes. Trust in the education system, trust in your school erodes. And inequality can deepen. And that is a real risk if we do not bring everyone with us. And that is why this is not just a technology conversation, it's a leadership conversation. It's a pedagogy conversation. What is the role of the educator and what has it always been? It's a values conversation, which brings me to the final shift that we need to make. For a long time, much of education has been organized around achievement, getting the mark, getting the answer, completing the task. But AI is forcing us to ask a far more important question. What can learners do without the machine? Can they still reason? Can they still create? Can they evaluate? Can they still struggle productively toward understanding? Andreas Schleicher from the OECD has made this point many times before, and some of you may have heard it, but it's a point that the future of education cannot only be defined by achievement. And the AI era has made this more profound and more relevant than any time before. In a world where information is abundant and machines can generate answers instantly, what will matter increasingly is agency, the capacity to think, to question, to create, and to act with judgment. And that is why I believe this moment right now is about a shift from achievement to agency, from getting answers to learning how to think, question, and create. AI can definitely help us get there, but it can also block our way. And it depends on how we design for it. And that brings me to my last point. And I'd like to leave this as my last point for you. AI is not the threat. Unintentional use of it is. South Africa is not waiting on this. The Minister and the Department of Basic Education have started the journey of building policy, guidance, and coordination to make sure that our response is coherent, responsible, and nationally led. But ultimately, this will not be decided only in boardrooms, steering committees, or policy documents. It will be decided in classrooms. But it will also be shaped by the quality of our policy, the clarity of the legal frameworks, and the seriousness with which we govern emerging technologies in the public interest. It will be determined in the choices that the many teachers in this room make, in the tasks that schools design, in the guardrails that institutions set, and in whether we keep human judgment at the center. Because education is not about answers, it's about thinking. And that is something we must never, ever outsource to AI. Thank you.